So this morning, really, this is all about Jeff Kleinberg. It's all about Jeff. And it is, of course, my pleasure to introduce Jeff Kleinberg as our fellow speaker for the AGPA Connect 2020. Jeff, I think it feels just right, and I'm happy to be having the honor to introduce you in your hometown. Just seems the right speaker for this morning. I asked Jeff to send me a little bio, a little cheat sheet on what he wanted me to say about him. And he sent back just a few sentences. And those of us who know Jeff know that I could be up here for a very long time with a long list of accomplishments. But we all know that Jeff served as president of EGPS during the 9/11 attacks. And then exactly 10 years later, he became president of AGPA. And Jeff edited the Wiley-Blackwell Handbook of Group Psychotherapy. And many of you in the audience this morning were involved as authors of the chapters of this very important work and book for us as professionals. And Jeff has recently been focused on public mental health issues. He's been training mental health professionals in parts of the world, including China, Republic of Georgia, the Caribbean nations of Grenada and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And Jeff told me that what he is most proud of all of his accomplishments, he's most proud of his distinguished fellowship into AGPA. Yeah. So I would like to say I see him not only as a distinguished fellow in AGPA, but a distinguished human being and full of life and generosity. I first got to know Jeff after Hurricane Katrina, our own tragedy in Louisiana, and he came to our local affiliate to help us debrief after that tragedy, and many other people came as well. And he came pro bono along with others, and we will always remember that very loving, generous gift to us, Jeff. So, Jeff, I have brought you a small gift to help you remember Louisiana in case you've forgotten us. Absolutely. It's just a little something. Mardi Gras is past. Mardi Gras was Tuesday before I left on Friday. It ended on Tuesday. We started to repent of our sins on Wednesday, go to Mass and do all those things. So anyway, it's just a little Mardi Gras something. So now let us sit back and relax and enjoy our jolly good fellow, Jeff Kleinberg.
I'm going to use an app to make sure I don't go over time, because that's one of my main objectives, not to go over time. Okay, so I'm not looking at the stock market here. I'm looking at 20 minutes I'm setting it for. Well, that's a great introduction. I've had less than great introductions previously. Once I was introduced as the late president of AGPA. And this is the scary one.
Jeff, I think people want you to move closer.
How's this? Okay. Another time I was introduced as the last president of AGPA. And then when I did receive the fellowship promotion, I was introduced as the extinguished fellow. So you did a great job, and makes me feel it right at home. I just want to mention that I know it's very early to be here. Sinatra once said that he didn't know there was a 7 a.m. So we realize that. The impact of group is really amazing. If you walk down to Times Square, you see the characters like Superman and Humpty Dumpty and all that. Well, I went there last night going home to get the subway, And they were in a circle. So we had Humpty Dumpty, we had Cinderella, we had several other people, people from Sesame Street, and they were all in a circle. They were actually doing a process group. I knew Marcia had a lot of influence, but this is, and Humpty Dumpty is recovering. I want you to know that. Last night something happened. I'm moving fast through that one. Last night something really startling happened to me down in the lobby. You know, Sheraton has an interesting reputation down in the lobby. A very strange guy came over to me, and he asked me if I wanted to buy this, and I looked at it. It was a small bottle of Purell for $80. So if you need Purell, in the past people would exchange recipes for cheesecake in New York or pastrami. Now they're exchanging recipes for hand sanitizer. If you go online, you can see many ways, because you can't find it. You can't find, Costco is out of toilet paper, so I want to let you know in case this is something important to you. So we live in very strange times. I want to just acknowledge the presence of and the absence of some other people. I'm really very happy to see and be sitting next to Barry Helfman. He is such a good guy, and it's nice to have you back. Okay. And I also want to acknowledge that a good friend of ours, Zhu Young, is not here. He was supposed to come along with 24 fellow therapists, and of course they could not get visas here, so that's a real loss. I did speak to him on Skype a couple of weeks ago, and we started talking about doing something using video for the counselors dealing with this terrible virus there. And I said, okay, I would do it using video, Skype. And I wanted to know how to think about it in terms of the size of the group, maybe 10, 12. I said, how many do you expect? He said, 10,000 people have signed up. 10,000 people. So I immediately dropped the idea of going around the room to have it. So you have to be ready for anything and everything. So Richard knows. Okay, so I want to talk about a very, very serious topic that's something that I experienced and that I know others of you have experienced, and it's another kind of pandemic. And that's the pandemic about potential burnout that we've faced and that we are going to face. I mean, there will be, and this is just not my prediction, obviously this is out there will be the need for much trauma counseling in the weeks and months ahead as the virus enters its community spread situation. And what I found through my personal experience, and Keith is really last year was a model for integrating the personal and the professional, and I really admired what you did, and it made me think about how my life has been affected at various points by some of the work I was doing. And my message to you is be very aware of the connection between the professional work we do and personal crises that we face. You can read a lot about and participate in programs where the focus is on compassion fatigue or secondary trauma, but what often is left out is the vulnerability we face going into those situations that ramps up the stress levels that we're facing as we do our work. So that's really what I want to talk about today. And I'm not suggesting that AGPA take on more responsibilities or add new programs. I think this is something that has to be addressed at the local level because each area is different. Now, over the last 20 years, I've experienced simultaneous trauma as a provider facing huge doses of personal trauma as well. And some of you know my story. I think my story may be your story as well in some cases. It might be stories that lie ahead. There are variations on that theme. Our work and personal lives bleed into each other, and we are faced with the risk of going from compassion fatigue to burnout. It's both an occupational hazard and a life crisis. At the macro level, this is an epidemic in the making. Too many of us in this society are in denial. We need to face it head on. Our work comes with risks. And as we both cope with the stress related to our work, we have to be mindful of what our personal lives are doing to make things even more difficult. Statistically, research, and a lot of the research is very limited, but it seems that between 30 and 54% of mental health professionals and related providers report burnout. Just about a month ago, the Academy of Medicine came out with an amazing report focusing mostly on physicians and their burnout. It's very high, and it's very upsetting to read that. Similar studies have not been done on group therapists, we know that, but there have been studies which have found that therapists face this challenge of dealing with professional burnout as well as personal frustrations and personal crises. Let me tell you a little bit about my own experience. At 2000, I retired. I took early retirement from City University and was ready to transition into full-time private practice. I got out of City University because the classes were large, contact hours were unusually high for a college, it was a community college, and politics made for a lot of unpleasantness. For example, and those of you who are affiliated with universities will recognize this, getting on the parking lot committee was a lot more important than getting in the curriculum committee, right? Because the parking lot committee gave out spots in the parking lot, and that was the power base for many people. This was so ridiculous I had to get out, and I did get out. I had trained at an institute called the Postgraduate Center for Mental Health, which had a terrific program in group. My wife, and I'm talking about the personal, was getting ready to retire from her position as director of a city-sponsored home health program. The plan, as it turned out, was not to be. Unexpected disruptions occurred. Our lives were turned upside down. Structures I had depended on collapsed. My professional work similarly moved in unexpected directions. For me, I found that the opportunity to train others seeking ways to respond to community trauma arose as I was dealing with personal trauma. Briefly, 9/11 took place when I was president of EGPS. And how did I get into EGPS leadership? I was told, run for office, it'll be a piece of cake, there's nothing to do. That sounded like it fit my skill set, right? Well, that was not to be. Richard knows this very well because he was on the executive board with me. Just a bit after, my wife, Glee, many of you know, and she was really a terrific supporter of what we do. Out of the clear blue, developed pancreatic cancer and passed away. Later, the Postgraduate Center ended all of their training programs suddenly, including group, after being hit by $1 million Medicare penalty. So my intellectual home, where I would be valued and be part of a referral network, disappeared overnight, threatening my financial status. I had left a secure job, and now there was some problems. I contend that for a person in that situation, hit by personal trauma and leading to vulnerability at the same time as doing the work of therapist is a real threat, and it's a real threat to burning out. I saw that the structures that I had depended on were no longer there, and I didn't find much help in the community or even within the profession. People in that situation, and I was in that situation, need more than a hug or a handshake or a phone call. There needed to be some, this is all in retrospect, some involvement, some engagement with people who know what it's like to try to maintain a practice, try to work with others who are facing crises at the same time we're dealing with our own crises. I didn't find it, and I feel bad about that. And I've seen the impact of the personal and the professional crises coming together in some of the work I did in other parts of the world. And this work was sponsored by AGPA, IAGP, the International. I went back to school at Mount Sinai to get a degree in public health so I could at least pretend I knew what I was doing. And Mount Sinai sponsored some of these trips. And I was really as much of an observer as a participant. I want to mention or underscore what we heard about Katrina. Karen was terrific. Many of you were there. Richard was there, and it was quite an experience. They were the mental health people, the group therapists, were really struggling because at the same time they were dealing with with people who lost so much, they had lost so much. People would talk about the loss of income, the loss of homes, the loss of colleagues or relatives of colleagues. So I didn't coin this phrase, but people were in the soup. So it wasn't that we were okay and the clients or the group members were not okay. Everybody was feeling the trauma, and it was a very risky situation for everybody, not just in terms of personal safety, but also for personal continuity. In China, after the 2008 earthquake, where thousands and thousands of people died and villages were destroyed, Chinese counselors volunteered to travel to the affected area to counsel those who had lost everything. Now, when a process group was conducted, people began to acknowledge the personal stress they were under, not only worried about aftershocks, but also how much they had lost and how much they were afraid they were going to lose. So this became a personal trauma, not because they were identifying with the victim, they were victims. At another point, I was in the Republic of Georgia, and they were, for those of you who don't know this, were dealing with the after effects of a war with Russia. Now, Georgia is a great country, but they can't match the resources of Russia. So there were thousands of refugees, displaced citizens. And on top of that, as if they didn't need more stress, a flood destroyed the zoo in Tbilisi, which meant, and this is really very sad, and you can go on the internet and see pictures, the animals were now running through the street. And what were the police doing? They were shooting the animals. It was a very tragic situation. People were very scared. Their economy was shot. The animals were lost. People's lives were lost. The looming threat of an invasion, a greater invasion from the Soviet Union, really, really terrible. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, turf wars broke out between nurses and counselors over which group would work with mourners of teens who had drowned when a school bus overturned and fell in the ocean. And the parents of those school children stood on the shores of that sea and could not reach their children as they drowned because of the rocks and the strong waves. I had never heard of such a tragedy in my life. And everyone, it's such a small community, everyone knew everyone. And so people were affected in their personal lives as well as in their professional work. Charles Figley, who really does some great work on compassion fatigue, found that a history of trauma, lower social support, psychosocial distress impact compassion fatigue. So he's found evidence that personal vulnerability compounds the stress of our work. Now, one of the studies that's really important, 2 Australian researchers reviewing studies of 9,000 psychologists discovered burnout rates higher in those who were less experienced and less confident in their professional ability, and in those with less social support. Reduced social support stands out as a risk factor. So when you're thinking about the impact of group on people who lack social support, keep that in mind. Personal vulnerability threatens the clinician as their professional workload ramps up. I could go on, but I'm sure that each of you can describe your own personal and professional storms and those of your colleagues. What happens to those who face rising levels of stress? Many find that the existing resources to help us manage don't really exist. In some cases, group therapists cannot join a group to help them process what they're going through. Either they don't exist or they don't provide a confidential arena, and this is particularly true in small towns. In some settings, stigma prevents people from going for psychological help because it could blemish their record. So we have some challenges here. I have noticed over the years that many of us come to AGPA not just for continuing education, but as the program says, for renewal. Whatever the cognitive topic is, people are sharing or opening up in ways they don't open up back in their home community. So I really want us to embrace that role we play and that we can play, not suggesting that AGPA develop yet another program, but that we think at our local levels what can be done, or even on an individual basis, how to reach out. I looked at some of the newspaper reports of the bill that has just been passed on the virus to help communities, something like $6 or $7 billion. I didn't see any word about mental health. I didn't see any word about supporting providers. I'll let you fill in the blanks on that one. Here's some takeaways, because I see my clock is running. Here are the takeaways I'd like you to keep in mind. I know that all of us will at some point face cascading stress from both our personal lives and professional work occurring simultaneously. This will threaten our own well-being. This could happen in the days ahead. Take an inventory of your resources. You will need to do that now. Second, we need to reach out to friends and associates who could use more than a handshake or a hug. We need to address colleagues who seem to be not doing well and not wait for them to come to us. We need to grasp the way different cultures and the professionals within them risk burnout and cope with community and personal stress. We need to be mindful of the particular stress faced by younger professionals and respond to them. We can reach out to other health providers who are on the front lines, physicians, nurses, social workers, etc., to see if they could use some work from us to help them deal with both the personal and the professional. I think they'll be very interested in that. At least it will be the beginning of a conversation. In all cases of community training and that I observed, because when I go into a country, I'm ostensibly teaching group therapy. The process group is where issues come out, and that's where we need to both enable that to happen and to embrace that role that it provides for people experiencing both personal and professional stress. I hope that we can all reflect on our own vulnerabilities in the days, weeks, and months ahead, because this crisis, personal and professional, is coming. We are all in the soup. What may happen amid the threats of the coronavirus? How can we prepare ourselves? How can we get ahead of the curve? I don't have an answer to that. I think each of us needs to answer that for ourselves, but we need to talk about it. Can we get ahead of the curve? That's my message for today. Thank you.